Good evening, everyone. The League of Women Voters of Illinois is thrilled to welcome you to our Wednesday evening edition of Issues Briefing 2020. My name is Allison Hout, and it is my honor to serve as the president of the League of Women Voters of Illinois. For 102 years now, the League of Women Voters has worked across our nation to empower voters and defend democracy. Our success lies in our ability to foster civic engagement and facilitate access to information. And our power rises from our presence in communities throughout our country. Our annual issues briefing gathers together bright, curious, and concerned people to educate each other so that we can foster civic education, advocacy for change, and voting in our communities. Issues Briefing, this event, can be a starting point, a springboard to action. From this night, we can all move forward, leaving the reassuring sounds of our echo chamber and go into our communities where we listen to understand, we collaborate, we educate, we engage, and we activate. What we know about education and civic engagement is this: people who have information, people who are engaged, those people are more likely to be voters. We each have a loud voice through our right to vote, and that voice from our vote, of each of our votes, must be heard. Ultimately, that is where our strength lies, in our votes. So let's educate and let's activate. Let's see more people using their vote to speak up about what matters most to them. Tonight, we're going to focus on issues that are local and also know no boundaries. Issues of our environment do not respect walls or borders. We all have to be knowledgeable and act in ways that protect and benefit all of us when it comes to the environment. Tonight, I urge you to listen actively, ask questions, and then take what you learn into your community, to your family, to your friends, to your neighbors. Educate, activate, create opportunities for civic engagement. If you have a casual discussion about something that you learned tonight with one family member and one friend, you have activated and you can be creating civic engagement. Before we begin, I remind you that our meeting tonight is being recorded. Our speakers are being spotlighted. So if you want to see just the speakers, use speaker view up in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Subtitles have been enabled. If you want to activate, enlarge, or end the subtitles, use the live transcript box at the bottom of your screen. Toward the end of the session, we will be having question and answer period. During the presentation, please put your questions into the chat and direct them to question asker. League members will be posing the questions at the end of our session. And finally, please join me in welcoming our American Sign Language interpreters for this evening, Vera Marie Baldoza and Sheila Kettering, and give a big thank you message to our LWVIL Board of Directors, our LWVIL Issues and Advocacy Committee, and every person who has been a part of creating this fantastic week of education and activation. So now we'll turn off all our other devices, we'll lean in and engage. Please welcome Laura Davis, our issue specialist for the environment, who will introduce our speakers. Laura?
Thank you, Allison. And I share issue specialist environment with Bill Kale, and Bill and I will both be question takers. So you can direct your questions to either one of us. But good afternoon to everybody, and welcome to the session of the 2022 League of Women Voters Illinois Issues Briefing. This evening's program is addressing storage of spent nuclear fuel. First, we'll be joined by members of the New Mexico League who will describe their research, which informed a position being proposed for concurrence at the U.S. League's convention. Karen Douglas is a nuclear engineer, and Bobbie Riedel is a PhD candidate in nuclear engineering. Also, we have Doug Ower with us, who lives in Zion and will be sharing his experience of living in a community where a nuclear plant closed very abruptly. So thank you for being here, and we'll start with Bobbie and Karen, please.
Thank you very much, Laura. Good evening, and the League of Women Voters of New Mexico is very pleased to have this opportunity to address you. Now I'm going to share the screen and show our slides. Can everyone see the slides?
Yes.
Okay. The League of Women Voters of New Mexico has been studying spent nuclear fuel storage safety since 2017 and developed a position following consensus meetings with our 4 local leagues spring of 2021. The position was approved by our April 2021 convention, and we're requesting that other leagues, beginning with Illinois, consider our position for concurrence. We are first approaching Illinois because you have 11 reactors, more than any other state in the United States. This shows the location of the independent spent fuel storage installations in our United States. As you can see, they are numerous. There are 74 in 34 states, mostly concentrated in the eastern half of the United States. If you'll note the 2 stars in the lower left, those are the 2 sites for candidate consolidated interim storage facilities. One is in Andrews, Texas, co-located with Waste Control Specialists, a low-level waste burial ground. The other is the Holtec site in southeastern New Mexico, very close, within 30 miles of the WIP site you may have heard of for transuranic waste disposal. So what do we know about the history and status of spent nuclear fuel? Well, prior to 1980, our nation planned to reprocess spent nuclear fuel so that there would be a minimal residue left and the majority of it could be reused in reactors. Many other nations, including Russia and France and other European nations, currently reprocess, but in the United States decided that that could lead to proliferation of nuclear weapons usable material. So in 1980, plans changed. Under the Carter administration, they closed down the Clinch River breeder reactor. In 1982, the Nuclear Waste Policy Act was considering candidate sites for a permanent repository for spent nuclear fuel burial. In 1987, they narrowed those sites to only Yucca Mountain in Nevada. There was to have been a monitored retrievable storage facility comparable to these consolidated interim storage facilities, co-located with Yucca Mountain when construction began. In 1998, what was the Nuclear Waste Policy Act deadline, mandated transfer of spent nuclear fuel to permanent geological repository owned and operated by the United States Department of Energy. But of course, since Yucca Mountain didn't open, that did not happen. There is a nuclear waste fund for management of the nation's spent nuclear fuel. It was created in 1987 by the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. Nuclear utilities have paid fees into the Nuclear Waste Fund for spent fuel disposal. In fact, now with interest, it's more than $35 billion. And a federal appeals court suspended collection because the federal government did not take ownership of the spent nuclear fuel. The utilities still have it, and so no additional fees have been collected. This shows the current United States. This is a little blurry and I apologize. This shows the 99 that were operating in 2017, the nuclear power plants. And again, you'll note that they're mostly concentrated in the eastern half of the United States. see. Hold on. This, I believe, is the decommissioning. Yes, these are the sites undergoing decommissioning. There are currently 21 and 2 that have been shut down permanently, 3 Mile Island and the Pilgrim reactor. And later in this presentation tonight, Mr. Ower will be discussing the Zion nuclear power plant in Illinois there and their decommissioning process and problems. This shows what consumers have paid into the nuclear waste fund. You'll note that Illinois, with the most reactor, has also paid the most at 2.3 billion, followed by Pennsylvania with 8 reactors with approximately 2 billion paid into the nuclear waste fund. This shows the candidate sites that were considered for a permanent repository. You can see there were a number of them, and they are somewhat restricted by the type of geology, the formations that exist in those areas. The 3 that were held the most recently was the Hanford site in Washington State, the Yucca Mountain site in Las Vegas, Nevada, and the Deaf Smith County site in the Panhandle of Texas. They're denoted by squares there. The Yucca Mountain site is shown in the lower diagram. It's approximately 100 miles from Las Vegas, Nevada. So what's the history and status? Well, after 2010, during the Yucca Mountain during the Obama administration, Nevada political opposition to Yucca Mountain halted DOE's transfer plans. DOE shut down the project office at Yucca Mountain and pulled back all of the federal and contractor personnel doing research. In 2014, the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals directed the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to reconsider Yucca Mountain. The funding provided was enough for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to publish the 5-volume safety evaluation report, which appears on their website. In 2017, the federal administration briefly pursued Yucca Mountain. However, that was halted within approximately 6 months. That's when DOE Secretary was Rick Perry, formerly Texas governor. The New Mexico, Texas Consolidated Interim Storage Facility license, the license has been approved for the Andrews, Texas site, the Interim Storage Partners. The license approval by NRC is pending for the New Mexico Holtec site. It was originally anticipated in January of 2022. However, later here in the presentation, we'll be discussing this consent-based siting that the DOE is again revisiting.
So I'm going to talk about the different, about spent nuclear fuel and greater than Class C waste and what it is. So where does it originate? So spent nuclear fuel and greater than Class C waste comes from commercial nuclear power operations. So from nuclear reactors and the associated operations with regards to, handling commercial nuclear fuel. It does not come from nuclear weapons production. So any defense waste would not be included at the site. It's handled in a very different manner by a different organization. So what is the composition of spent nuclear fuel? So spent nuclear fuel specifically is irradiated nuclear fuel, which are like uranium ceramic pellets. They're very small and they're stacked in tubes, which are cladding tubes. And these basically have an insufficient amount of uranium U-235, which is the fissile isotope. It's the isotope necessary for nuclear fission. And there's just not enough of that left in order to continue power production as needed in a nuclear reactor. Now, that does not mean it's not very hot or producing energy, which I will talk about in a little bit. But that's what spent nuclear fuel is, basically ceramic metal pellets that have been, quote unquote, used up to their fullest potential. Greater than Class C waste, that's irradiated non-fuel items. So this includes empty cladding tubes. This includes tools that are used to move nuclear fuel with regards to core shuffling or any types of movement within the core, or moving new fuel or old fuel out of the core. This also includes pieces of the reactor that are on the what they call the primary side, which are exposed to the radiative water. That is greater than Class C waste. So anything that's on the reactor side that touches the nuclear fuel but isn't nuclear fuel itself, that's what greater than Class C waste is. Both spent nuclear fuel and greater than Class C waste must be removed from a decommissioned reactor site prior to site restoration for community reuse. So if you have a decommissioned reactor, you have to remove these materials before you can use it. So why move spent nuclear fuel and greater than Class C waste from its current locations? Oh my goodness, and pause. Well, many reactors are near water, which, you know, makes sense for cooling purposes. But the metal canisters, for example, at Turkey Point, which is in Florida, is a nuclear reactor. They're exhibiting, or Diablo Canyon, the metal canisters are exhibiting signs of corrosion as being exposed to like the salt water and like sea air. This can cause potential, you know, environmental contamination and necessary cleanup. Also, longer term, there are issues with immersion from rising sea levels. This isn't a huge problem for Illinois. However, you know, considering certain floodplains and things, you know, changing with regards to climate change, that might be something to take into consideration. So also increased long-term security precautions. So right now, a lot of spent nuclear fuel and greater than Class C waste, specifically spent nuclear fuel, is housed at a bunch of different reactor sites and different decommissioned sites all across the country. And each one of these requires, you know, money and time and effort and personnel to take care of the security precautions that have increased following 9/11. Now, those costs could be reduced by having, and the security increased by having a consolidated site. And so consolidated locations would ease security management. And also a lot of these facilities in these local communities, they want to remove this waste, like I said before, so that they can start reusing those locations and that land. So next slide. So let's talk a little bit about dry cask storage. So what we have, you have two parts to a dry cask storage. So you have a canister and you have a cask that canister goes into. So the canister itself has internal scaffolding, which is used to sort of keep the structural integrity of your spent nuclear fuel or your materials that you're holding from, you know, slumping or falling into each other. Also, that scaffolding is usually made out of a metal that includes boron. Boron is a neutron absorber. The reason you would use that is to make sure that all of the spent nuclear fuel that you would be moving, none of it would all of it would stay subcritical. You want that because you don't want to have a criticality in a canister. And then that is enclosed by an internal several inches thick stainless steel shell, which then has a layer of a heat conducting material as like this intermediary shell around that, and then a forged steel shell, which is used to, again, protect that. All of this has both sides welded shut with two lids, a primary lid and a secondary lid. And then both sides also include a shock absorbing front cover and back cover, you know, necessary for transportation or, you know, within the cask itself, and, you know, shock absorbing. So this canister is then placed inside a large concrete cask, as you can tell, next to a person. It's very large. This is usually these casks without the spent nuclear fuel in them weigh about 28 tons. So they're very large. And then basically this cask is made out of concrete. It's about 3 feet thick. And it uses basically passive cooling. The air goes at the bottom. It cools the hot canister, which is conducting the heat from the spent nuclear fuel out through the canister. And then passive convection is cooling that canister, which allows it to cool over time. And this canister is held in the cask with a basket, so it prevents any type of lateral movement from occurring, in transportation or in the placement of these casks. The top is usually made out of both concrete and then some type of forged steel or iron, and is about 1 to 5 tons in weight, just the lid. This means that you need a special type of crane to remove the tops. So based on this, these are very large pieces of equipment, and they require special equipment to remove any type of spent nuclear fuel from the canister or cask. So next slide.
Spent nuclear fuel is highly regulated. It's currently controlled by the Code of Federal Regulations. Title 10, Section Part 72 regulates both the canister design as well as the storage activity itself. There's been a 36 years history of dry cask storage in our nation, beginning with the Surrey reactor in Virginia in 1986. However, both this New Mexico Holtec Consolidated Interim Storage Facility and the Texas Interim Storage Partners Consolidated Interim Storage Facility would have an initial 40-year license to operate. Then there's a potential for a 40-year license renewal. Our current nuclear power plants typically have had a 20-year license renewal, and then an additional 20-year subsequent license renewal, permitting 80 years of operation. And as you see, there was only 36 years of storage history for spent nuclear fuel. So there is a concern. There are safety measures in place, both dry cask storage inspection and aging management programs. And Bobbie can address this later if you have any questions to discuss any extra activity to ensure continued safe storage. The New Mexico position that, again, we reached in April 2021, we wanted no site disturbance of the Consolidated Interim Storage Facility. However, for our New Mexico Holtec location, the geology where this would be located, there are sinkholes, there's fault lines, and there's other unstable geologic characteristics. There's current potash mining under the site, oil and gas drilling, which feeds our permanent fund in New Mexico. It's the revenue source for our education and also for social programs. There's also ongoing fracking in the area of the Holtec CISF. Transportation of spent nuclear fuel, as you can see, that's also regulated by Title 10, Part 71 of the Code of Federal Regulations. There's currently extensive spent nuclear fuel transport history, both rail and highway. However, both the New Mexico and Texas sites have specified that only rail transport to our 2 locations will be used. There's been more than 1,300 spent nuclear fuel shipments in the 40-year history. And there were, as Bobbie mentioned, there's been increased security precautions after 9/11. They coordinate every transport with law enforcement agencies before shipment. They require advance notice to states, Indian tribes, and the NRC. They use a communication center and other means to monitor shipments while en route, armed escort, and devices that allow drivers and escorts to immobilize the vehicle. We have additional backup slides on transportation that we can discuss with you later after Mr. Ower addresses you. So our position also had concerns about liability, indemnification, and compensation. Again, this is the link to the Code of Federal Regulations. Indemnification of consolidated interim storage facility corporations, and again, Holtec and interim storage partners are not the federal government, they're private corporations. We would like to see indemnification comparable to the Price Anderson reporting and fines that are used for DOE contractors and national laboratories. That is the citation from the Code of Federal Regulation, and that's in case of accident or abandonment. We'd like to have insurance comparable to the decommissioning trust fund. Every operating reactor in the United States has a decommissioning trust fund. So you have one in Illinois for your 11 reactors. And that's the Code of Federal Regulations citation for the decommissioning trust fund. You can review it if you'd like. And again, as I mentioned, it's required for all commercial reactors. We also wanted state compensation for normal operations. Currently, the only incentive is that it would produce some jobs, approximately 100 positions during the construction phase and fewer in the continuing operation. What's our current status in New Mexico? There's no permanent disposal strategy for spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste in place at the Department of Energy. There's no permanent repository. July 1st, our current Democratic Governor Lujan Grisham, Democratic Senators Heinrich and Lujan, and Representative Stansberry sent correspondence to DOE Secretary Granholm protesting the Holtec site. June of 2021, Baskin Land and Permian Basin Land, these are oil and gas interests, filed a lawsuit in federal court that challenges NRC orders regarding the Holtec permitting process. And it alleges that NRC is violating the Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1987 by considering Holtec's consolidated interim storage facility application. The 2021 New Mexico Attorney General, Hector Balderas, also challenged regarding the Holtec CISF because they were alleging it was illegal since there was no permanent site. However, that only applied to the Nuclear Waste Policy Act for a federal site, and these are private. That suit was dismissed. The U.S. DOE Office of Nuclear Energy has resumed its consent-based siting inquiries. There were 2015 to 16 inquiries where our New Mexico Republican Governor Martinez, Republican Congressman Pierce, and 13 Southeast New Mexico elected officials requested that the New Mexico Holtec site be permitted. And December 2021, there was a webinar with U.S. DOE Deputy Secretary Catherine Huff revisiting consent-based siting. December 2021, there was a Federal Register notice seeking public comment on aspects of the siting approach. Several Bobbie and I and other members of our Spent Nuclear Fuel Storage Committee participated in a collaboration, and we submitted our 6-page response to the consent-based siting questions. There were 16 to DOE last week. The deadline was March 4th for responding. Thank you. Do you have any questions for us? I guess we're moving on to Mr. Ower and then going to handle questions all at the end. Thank you again for this opportunity to address you. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Bobbie. Yeah, we're going to move on to Doug now, and then at the end, we'll wrap up with questions. And please remember to put your questions in the chat to the question takers. Thank you. Doug?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. Karen, can you stop the screen share?
We heard you, Doug.
Yeah, sorry about that. I had it ready to go, and so of course it disappeared. That's how these always go. So, okay, I think we're ready now. So
Better you than us.
Thank you, Rosemary. Thank you again for the opportunity. My name's Doug Ower. I'm a lifelong Zion resident. I was living in Zion before the nuclear plant was there, and I'm still here now that it's down. So I was on the Citizens Advisory Panel during the decommissioning, and I'm also chair of the local group of Sierra Club. So Zion is in the far northeast corner of Illinois on Lake Michigan. And the pictures you'll see in the presentation, I took most of these during the decommissioning. So I did want to go through what the current status is. We'll talk about spent fuel storage in Zion, the Citizens Advisory Panel, impact on community, and I did want to discuss a little bit about consolidated interim storage. Okay, my screen is, hang on one second, please. Okay, the facility opened around 72, 73. The plant closed very suddenly in 1998. And then decommissioning began in 2010. I'll discuss later some of the impact on the community, especially with a very sudden closure. It was long before it was anticipated it would close, and has had some serious financial impacts on the community. This was, as I understand, the first time that this was done, but the operating license was transferred from Exelon, who owns the facility. It was transferred to a company called Zion Solutions, and they offered to do the decommissioning for the cost of the decommissioning fund. At this point in time, the decommissioning is nearly completed, but there are a few hot spots or radioactive particulates that's been found on site. And so that still has to be finalized before everything can be completed. And the license will then transfer back to the now company called Constellation, which is a spinoff of Exelon. Approximate decommission cost was around $900 million to do Zion. There was 2 reactors on site that they had to do, as well as the rest of the facilities. So the Class A waste, which is the least radioactive, was shipped to a site owned by the parent company of Zion Solutions, Energy Solutions, and it went to Kyiv, Utah. That was over 3 million pounds. The cars on the right are what those were transferred in. They had a sealed a top enclosure on it, and they were running several loads a week out at the height of when they were moving the waste. The Class B and C waste went to Andrews, Texas, which is one of the sites being talked about for consolidated interim storage, and the greater than Class C and spent nuclear fuel is in Zion. This is the type of cast that was used in Zion. This was a MagnaStor cast, and what they report is that it weighs 157 tons loaded. It's almost 19 feet tall. The concrete 26 inches thick. There are 4 casts that are greater than Class C, and then there's 61 casts that are the spent nuclear fuel. This is what they look like when they came in on the left, when they came into Zion. They came in without the concrete, and then they literally poured the concrete on site. And on the right side are the interior liners or baskets. Now this is where the spent fuel is stored. It's an FC, what's called an independent spent fuel storage installation. On the left, you can see the dry cast, and on the right is the security building, which is manned at all times. And this entire site was built for the storage of the cast. It was not there before the decommissioning started. I don't know why this keeps jumping. All right, sorry about that. So this is a Google map just to give you an idea of what the site looks like. At the very south end is the Illinois Beach State Park, the beginning of it. On the right is Lake Michigan. Directly on the left or west side is the Exelon property, and then to the north is another part of the state park. The containment domes shown in that picture are gone. You can see in the center bottom the dry cast and the security building, and then directly above it, that is still there. Those are switching yards for the high transmission power lines. That is still active, and those will remain on the site. This is a close-up of the storage pad that you can see. So there's 2 rings of fencing around with a clearance in between the security building and then the 65 dry casts. And this is what the site looks like now. All the buildings are cleared out. This is just directly east of the FC pad and the switching yards. It's looking towards Lake Michigan, and there's no facilities left on site. This is still secured. It's marked not to enter because the site still has not been cleared by the NRC. So when Zion Solutions started the decommissioning, they created a citizens advisory panel. I was able to get on that. It was mostly composed of elected officials from the surrounding area, and then some people, other public safety officials and that sort of thing were members of the board. Pretty much no one on it had any extensive experience with nuclear or nuclear decommissioning. There's one person that did radiological work at the hospital, but other than that, there's no one with any nuclear experience. During the main part of the decommissioning, it would meet 4 times per year, and with 1 annual plant tour for members of the panel. The thing about the way this is configured is ZCAP, the panel, has had absolutely no authority and no funding. It was strictly created by Zion Solutions, and it was basically an opportunity for them to communicate to the public what was occurring with the decommissioning. They did all the presentations. Typically, the NRC had a representative or 2 at the meetings, and then IEMA is the Illinois Emergency Management Authority, and they also have radiation monitors around the site, and they usually had a representative there. So it was really just a mechanism for them to tell the community what was happening. Exelon themselves were completely absent. They have never communicated with anyone about their plans for the property. They will now be Constellation, but any of their plans are completely unknown for the site at this point in time. So I just thought I'd throw this out because I think this is something that Illinois needs to look at, because there have been some decommissionings where the company doing the decommissioning is not even one to have any form of a citizens panel. I think it should be a requirement. I think we need to have state legislation to, one, make sure that they're required for decommissioning. We're going to have multiple nuclear plants coming up over some period of time that will need to be decommissioned. And so I think Illinois needs to prepare for that. I think the, a more beefed up type of organization is considered to be called a Citizens Oversight Board. It should be created by the community, not by the contractor. It should have some form of funding. I don't think a lot of funds are needed, but there should be some funding so that they can hire some consultants or nuclear experts if needed. They should be doing maybe reports and recommendations to both the state, local officials, and the public. And I think NRC should do presentations. They apparently are willing to do so, as well as the decommissioning contractor and any consultants that are hired. I think this will be a better way of having an idea of what's going on. The funds, of course, on the decommissioning funds were funded by ratepayers in Illinois. And so I think it would be best for everyone if there was an opportunity to find out more. One big sticking point with everyone during decommissioning was that financial disclosure was very shielded. Very little information was disclosed. They basically offered to do the decommissioning for the amount in the decommissioning fund, which was 800 million when they started, and then with interest, it's wound up being about $900 million. And although they have not disclosed all their finances, I think that they exceeded their budget on it. So they probably had to pay some of the costs out of pocket rather than through the ratepayers. The NRC was required to do a report on best practices for advisory panel. So there is a report there that could be used maybe to develop some legislation. Also, I think the state of New York has worked on legislation as well to have a more robust system panels. So Zion was hit very hard by the closure of the plant. It was estimated that the plant was about half of the tax base of the city. It was assessed at $693 million in 1996, which was right before shutdown. The property tax revenue that was lost is about $19 to $20 million per year. And the tax base still has not recovered from that loss, or a tax base of almost $700 million that was there. So Zion currently has the highest tax rate in the entire county. And this is a pretty wealthy county, and we have very high taxes in the city of Zion. As you can see, the population is just under the amount needed for home rule. It's just under 25,000 people. It's roughly 1/3 white, 1/3 black, 1/3 Hispanic, Latino. 17% are people in poverty. The median household income is 52,000. Median home values are 124,000. So this is not a wealthy community, and it's a community that has suffered due to this loss of tax revenue. One thing that helped quite a bit for us is that with the bill that was just passed last year, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, otherwise known as CEJA, our local state rep, along with other state reps in Lake County, worked very hard to get a provision added to the bill that will include funding for the storage of spent nuclear fuel in Zion. So that has the potential to have a considerable impact on both the town itself, plus all the schools and other taxing bodies. So that we'll see what happens, but if it goes through as expected, that should be a big benefit and help get Zion out of some of the bind that's in currently. There's also on the federal level, our U.S. Rep. Brad Schneider and Senator Duckworth have been working for some time on an act called the Stranded Act, which would help communities that are, faced with the situation that Zion is. Oops. Right before the CEJA was passed, which was last September, another nuclear plant, Byron, was literally within just a few days of closure. The CEJA did include a bailout for 2 of the nuclear plants that Constellation owns. One was Byron, and the other one was Dresden. It's $700 million over 5 years. Also, they had received a bailout of $2.5 billion over 10 years in the previous energy job that was passed, Future Energy Jobs Act that was passed in 2016. So the nuclear in Illinois just is not competitive. It's all generation is merchant. They have to sell into a competitive market, and nuclear is the highest cost of electricity And so they have been out looking for bailouts every time there's an energy bill. But the estimated potential economic impact on Byron, if it closed, was 720 jobs at the plant, 890 jobs from suppliers and vendors. They are currently paying $38 million in taxes. And then the Northern Illinois University had estimated that the contribution to the county that it's located in, Ogle County, was 338 million, or 17% of the entire county's GDP. The county itself only has 53,000 people, so twice what Zion is for the entire county. So when that plant closes, which it will at some point in time, this is another location that's going to be very hard hit. And one thing about CEJA is it did include a provision. There is a just transition in it for jobs and communities. It's focused more on fossil fuels, coal plants and coal mining, but it does have a provision in there for nuclear as well to help. But I think that's something that we need to look at, because as these plants close, there's significant impact on local communities. Many of these are located in lower population areas, and they just cannot absorb these kind of losses. So I did want to briefly mention, as I am very interested in nuclear, about the consolidated interim storage that was already discussed a bit. Some of the issues that have been brought up regarding using interim storage sites is, if they do go through, it could possibly just become a permanent storage. There's currently no permanent facilities. When I talked to the NRC at a hearing a number of years ago, I asked them about Zion. They said if a permanent facility was built, it would take at least 30 years before it would be ready to accept any spent nuclear fuel from Zion. So it's likely that if these interim storage facilities go in place, that they're going to be there for a very long period of time, or permanently. And I think it'll also delay putting in a permanent facility, and it will take away resources that are needed to create those facilities. And moving to an interim storage is going to increase risk by moving multiple times. If a permanent facility is actually built, multiple moves, it's multiple risks. Whether it's train derailments or just the fact that you're moving these gas multiple times, that should be a consideration. And environmental justice as well. These counties that are proposed for interim storage are all majority Hispanic populations. So Karen had mentioned both some people that are in favor of consolidated interim storage, and also some that were against. So I'm not going to repeat all those, but there are a number of organizations that are opposed. There is a National Radioactive Waste Coalition, which is over 40 organizations, which includes Nuclear Energy Information Service in Chicago, NEIS. They're opposed to interim storage, as is the Sierra Club, and additional organizations. And just recently, there was 140 organizations that is urging, that filed comments on the 4th of March, urging the DOE to withdraw from this push for interim storage. So with that, I think I've covered everything I was going to. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Doug. So we're going to get to some questions here, but I did have a request. Can Bobbie and Karen, I'm not sure if Bobbie's still with us, but can you re-summarize the changes to let the audience know the current position that's out there regarding nuclear and nuclear waste, spent nuclear fuel, is the U.S. League of Women Voters U.S. position. And what New Mexico is trying to do is basically enhance and protect for the communities, enhance our current national position and protect the community. But I'd like you to, if you can, walk through that a little bit, Karen, more specific on how it would change our current League of Women Voters US position?
Certainly, thank you, Laura. The current national position addresses nuclear waste in two areas, under nuclear issues and under waste management. None, though, address this potential for a consolidated interim storage facility. It just wasn't on the horizon at the time. That's only been a subject of discussion since about 2013. The two consolidated interim storage facilities, as I mentioned, and Mr. Ower also discussed, have had mixed reception in both states. They're definitely, the local community embraces it as a source of income. The larger area has concerns, and there's a lot of misinformation that's been spread. The current approach our League of Women Voters of New Mexico has taken, and we have 20 members on our Spent Nuclear Fuel Storage Committee, at least half of whom are scientists and engineers. A nuclear chemist, 3 nuclear physicists, Bobbie and I are nuclear engineers, a professional geologist, a geohydrologist, and then some in other sciences such as chemistry and biology. So approximately half of our committee members are scientists and engineers. We evaluated the environmental impact statement and wrote a 22-page commentary, a critique actually, with cover correspondence that was submitted to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I mentioned this recent submission last week. The League of Women Voters of New Mexico evaluated 16 questions the Department of Energy's Office of Nuclear Energy posed, asking regarding an approach for consent-based siting for a consolidated interim storage facility, in hopes of avoiding this impasse and disagreement. There were 16 questions in 3 areas. Our 6-page response was submitted last Thursday under cover correspondence, signed by our state president, Hannah Burling. We're pleased with the submissions we've made. We do believe that we offer a balanced discussion. We do have some members of Sierra Club actually on our state board who oppose spent nuclear fuel storage. We also have some on our committee. So the committee has a balance of scientists and engineers and professionals in other occupations. Not everyone is pro-nuclear, not everyone is anti-nuclear, and some signed on to the committee just to learn more and inform themselves better. What we hope to do is we've also approached California, but right now we're evaluating their criminal justice reform position for concurrence, and then we'll be working with them to obtain concurrence by the state of California's league. So yes, the first step we're requesting of Illinois is that your state consider our position, and Laura and Bill both have the position. In fact, they have the position with the markup as to where it supplements the U.S. impact on issues as most recently published 2020 to 2022 revision.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So some of the questions we have here, how long before the property, this is for Doug really, in Zion, can be used for regular, can be used?
As I understand, once the NRC clears the site, which it has not done yet due to some additional cleanup needs to be done, it would be available for other use. But Constellation owns the property, so any use would be up to them. Of course, subject to permitting or zoning or anything else, but they're the holders of the property, but it should be possible to use it for for something else.
Even with those casts still sitting there.
Well, exactly. That's one thing that, plus you still have the switching yards, and that's So I don't anticipate that they're going to make it available. To me, it would be an ideal location to connect into offshore wind because, that is the grid right there. So that would be one place to do it. But they own the property. Some people would like to have a connector between the north and south unit of the Beach State Park, but that would be up to Constellation, who, as I mentioned, will not talk to anyone about their plans.
Okay, so another question here, and then I think Bill has a couple of questions maybe too. Are interim storage sites so secure as permanent storage sites? Are they
And
as secure?
I can answer that question, Laura.
Okay.
Interim storage sites would have more security than the current spent fuel storage in the 74 locations in 34 states. Further consolidating to a single permanent repository with the spent fuel deep underground would be the best answer. Also reconsidering the reprocessing option that many nations in the world currently use. In fact, more do than don't that have spent fuel do reprocess. It minimizes the radioactive residue and it reuses the fuel. So in fact, we have a backup slide with some advanced reactors that would use spent nuclear fuel.
Okay. Bill, do you have a question there? Yeah.
Did you have a follow-up?
No, you go first, then I
Okay.
got one next for Doug.
There's one from Pat Walter. It says, can we see the 6-page response that you'd written? Is there a summary in this response? Is that part of the reference material we've included at the end?
No, we just completed and submitted that last Thursday. I'll send that to you and Laura, Bill. So, and please feel free to share it with other members.
Okay.
And a follow-up from Beverly George is organizations like Sierra Club are opposed to CIS, the combined interim storage. What do they propose as an alternative? I don't know, Karen, that you're going to be able to answer what the Sierra Club proposes as an alternative storage. And did you mention that really the best solution is to bury it and we don't have a place to bury it yet? Would that be kind of the
best
summary?
solution may be to reprocess it, but our country isn't considering that because of nuclear weapons usable material.
Do you have an idea what is currently we're kind of like at this is like the next best thing we can do? Is that what we've got, combined interim storage? We don't know what to do with it. So in the meantime, we'll do this.
I think specifically, and I believe Bobbie mentioned that some of the spent nuclear fuel in these storage locations is in an environment that's not conducive to that. And for example, the San Onofre nuclear generating station in California has casts that are corroding and they're being infringed upon them by rising water. So, and when there's corrosion of the cask, there's always a potential for a breach, or it increases the probability. Some of the spent fuel from high burnup fuel is fuel debris or residue or particulates, which isn't as easily encased as, and those fuel rods have to be placed in a cylinder to surround them within the cask to provide additional shielding.
Maybe as a follow-up, I'll put Doug on the spot. You're a Sierra Club member, Doug. What's the Sierra Club say to do with this stuff?
I am a Sierra Club member. As I understand, of course, they would like to have a permanent repository, but until then, they are opposed to moving the fuel offsite.
So I have another one, Doug, which is kind of where we've been going here with these other organizations offer to places like Florida, where the rising sea levels are a threat to their nuclear storage. Yeah, I mean, that's been a consistent theme here.
Can I make a comment, Laura? We had a backup slide on the transportation, which, as Doug mentioned, that, let's see here. Let's see. Here. Let me see. Maybe it's this one. I don't think that's sharing the way I want, though.
Transportation, I can see it here.
Can you see it? Okay.
You have to get, go over, I guess, to, I don't know how you get rid of that. Yes.
Just go to
From
the
current slide.
right.
Oh, say from current slide. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. Spent fuel transportation. There's a risk assessment that's 517 pages by the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. That's very comprehensive. I do have a copy of that. It quotes DOT highway and rail statistics offered by the, as mentioned, the Department of Transportation. Transport accident scenarios, including worst case conditions. And the result is there's no reading. There's also a 12-page brochure, Safety of Spent Fuel Transportation. This is in plain English, meant for the public, and we provided a copy to Laura as one of the handouts, and that she can share that with you if you'd like to know more about transportation and answer some of your questions regarding how rigorous the study is. The transport canisters must be able to survive 4 tests: impact, puncture, fire, and submersion in water. And during and after these tests, they must contain the nuclear material, limit radiation doses to acceptable and regulated levels, and prevent a nuclear chain reaction. They have successfully done that before they're licensed by the NRC to transport spent nuclear fuel. So, and again, as I mentioned, Laura has that brochure as one of the handouts. It's 12 pages and in plain English, meant for the general public.
Thank you. Actually, we did put a lot of these pieces on under the resources, I believe is where we're at on the issues briefing. So there are a lot of things that have been added on there. So let me see if I get some other questions here. Let me ask. Jan Goldberg is asking, the reliance on nuclear fuel, is it considered a safe alternative to reliance on fossil fuels if the spent fuel problem can be solved?
I can answer that as well. Reliance on fossil fuel, we know, is a problem with greenhouse gases and climate change. Nuclear energy currently provides more clean energy than any other source here in the United States. It provides 60% of our clean energy with no greenhouse gas emissions. It's also a baseload source, meaning that coal and nuclear here in the United States are our only 2 baseload sources, which are offered 24/7 reliance for energy. They're not intermittent as is wind or solar. Now in, I believe it's Norway or Finland, they have almost 100% hydropower, which is another baseload source. But I think we all agree that would depend on your location.
Can I answer that too as well?
Sure, Doug.
So, for example, in Illinois, as I mentioned, it's a competitive market. Nuclear is the highest cost source of electricity. It's not competitive. And to generate electricity in Illinois, you have to be competitive. The nuclear plants, the current style, you cannot bring online within a reasonable period of time or a reasonable cost. Vogtle is, I think, at least 10 years behind schedule and at least $10 billion over budget. So I know there's other types that are being considered, but the number one thing is there is nothing. There is no solution for spent fuel. That we have it all over, like as mentioned, it's all over the country, and there's no solution for it. And so generating more of it, I don't think is the answer.
I think this is getting into a different area about whether or not to continue with nuclear production of as a source for electrical power. I think most of our discussion tonight was what to do with the spent nuclear fuel. Or specifically, actually, for our group is whether or not to agree with or support New Mexico's request for concurrence that the spent nuclear fuel in New Mexico be strengthened, or is it in New Mexico be strong as it is in the United States for the, was it the NRC? Or which way are we going with that?
What we're, okay, our position actually isn't, doesn't support or oppose spent nuclear fuel storage. Instead, it requires that stringent safety precautions be employed, similar to those that are employed for actual nuclear reactor operation. And it also, and as I mentioned, about half of our spent nuclear fuel storage committee members are technical professionals who have some experience in nuclear and other engineering disciplines. So if you read, and this is also included in our response to the consent-based citing that I'll be sending to Laura and Bill to share with you. So we didn't oppose spent fuel storage, but as you can see from our concerns about liability and indemnification, compensation, stringent safety measures, security provisions, we would like to see that it's highly regulated, as is reactor operation, and that the spent nuclear fuel is given the same level of respect, I would say.
There's a question here for Doug, from Jean, actually. Are you worried about leakage into Lake Michigan from the cast that you have in Zion?
It could always be a concern. I mean, currently it's probably a few hundred yards away from the lake. So I would certainly like to see some more shoreline protection. I don't think it's in any immediate risk, but certainly some of the ocean areas are probably a higher level of concern.
Yeah, and being saltwater, I assume, is part of the
Yes.
issues. So here's a question too, from Gigi Moore. Are there any reports of residents getting sick from possible exposure to the radioactive contents?
No, there have been no reports. There's been no reports of cast breaching and leakage, which would expose the public. Now, I also have a slide here. Let's see. Yeah, let me show this. This is actually one of Bobbie's slides. Can you see the slide?
No.
Not yet.
Okay, let me see. What I need share.
Yeah, but while Karen's getting this up, obviously nuclear is a big issue. And the more we have a bunch of them across the United States, and we have a bunch of spent nuclear fuel sitting around. So it would be nice to have a permanent location. I know, Karen, you talked about some of the kind of the requirements. What is, in your opinion, where is a site that could accommodate a consolidated storage?
Let's see. First, I'd like to answer the question that was just up before. Now, what do I do? I do
To the left, current slide.
current slide. Okay, this was actually one of Bobbie's slides, but there were concerns about there was a question about whether there's been exposure due to a breach in a current cast storing spent nuclear fuel here or elsewhere. No, here in the United States, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission licenses the CAS design, but also to make sure that continued storage is safe, they have inspection procedures, and you can see the robot in the lower right-hand corner is increasingly being employed to minimize human exposure for this inspection. NRC conducts independent periodic safety inspections of fabricated dry casts to ensure fabricated casts meet NRC regulations. Designers responsible for developing effective and appropriate quality control procedure for fabricated casts. Licensees are responsible for ensuring NRC guidelines are met during site construction and operation. And NRC inspects the fabricated casts, the concrete pads they're seated on, or modules, cast loading, and routine monitoring of operations. In addition, I had raised the concern that we have 40 years, a 40-year track record for spent nuclear fuel storage, and these will probably be stored. Well, as we mentioned, there is no permanent repository site, and it would take, if we assume it will take 40 years to identify, characterize, and construct such a repository, because there's additional buildings that need to be built, and the underground structure needs to be developed. Aging management, so casts are being stored now and will continue to be. NRC's developing new methods, robots, let's see here, whoops. Robots, which inspect aging canisters and casts for weaknesses and cracks in welds and other surfaces, currently uses a series of non-destructive examination methods such as ultrasonic, eddy current, and guided wave examinations. And if degradation of a cask is identified, they have preferred method of cask repair, or they slide a larger sleeve over it to ensure that there's no breach.
So no incidents so far of anyone being
No,
impacted?
no incidents so far.
Okay, well, thank you both. I mean, and Bobbie, who had to leave a little early, really, thank you very much. So I've had a request here from Rosemary to kind of explain concurrence, what we've been kind of asked to do with the New Mexico League. So Rosemary?
Okay, I'll try to make it short. I'm long-winded, but you all know
I've got 3 minutes.
All right, I'll make it fast. So there are national positions for LWVUS, and there are state positions and local positions. So we're talking about the national position. So the original position of LWVS on nuclear meant that they must have done a study. They had all the leagues participate in the study. They came to consensus. They sent their answers back to national. National took all the responses, just like we did with the criminal justice study in Illinois, and came up with a position. But as years go by, sometimes there might need to be tweaks, updates, additions to some of our positions. And the thought of going through a whole entire study of the whole nation to add parts to it is pretty overwhelming. So there's an option called concurrence, where in this case, New Mexico has done the study in New Mexico on this topic. And so they've adopted this for their own state, and they're coming to the national convention for the delegates to vote on whether we trust, believe, are convinced, want to add what they have come up with as our national position as well. And so it's a pretty complicated topic. So Karen and Bobbie came here to Illinois hoping to reach out to those of us who will be delegates at convention, or maybe to educate our delegates, or at least to make them aware, because I assume you'll have a caucus at convention and you'll have materials, and you've been doing a lot of promotion. So it will be up to the delegates at the June convention in Denver to decide whether to add these additional materials from the New Mexico concurrence to our national position. So that, did I explain that correctly, or is there more there?
I think I may have misrepresented this with Laura. I thought there'd been this question and we had discussed it. No, the situation we're currently doing is we're not holding a caucus at this 2022 convention. We're first approaching states that have either a large number of spent fuel storage installations or reactors, and states where there's a problematic reactor, such as the San Onofre nuclear generating station in California. We're requesting that your state concur with the position.
Oh.
And since there's 74 reactors or interim storage facilities currently in 34 states, if we can even get a quorum of those states to concur, then we will approach national, because states which don't have any nuclear reactors or storage facilities are less apt to be receptive. But I think they would also agree that if states that do have spent fuel agree with us, that is the right approach.
Oh, I see. So you want us to concur at our state level first. So our
It
state
would be-
convention will be a year from June.
Mhm.
So, and that's when a concurrence for Illinois would come up to make it our position. And that's what you're saying?
Yes, and if there's any further questions regarding our position, and as I mentioned, I will send you our response that we submitted to Department of Energy last week for consent-based siting for consolidated interim storage.
Okay, all right,
Thank you.
all right.
Good, I'm
Thank you.
glad we
Thank
got
you,
that.
Rosemary. Thanks, Rosemary. I can't see you, but thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
So thank you to our speakers for sharing your insights with us today. And thank you to our league members and friends of the league for staying informed, preparing for considering the New Mexico position, and to learn about advocacy opportunities related to climate change and the environment. Please contact issues@lwvil.org and ask that you be added to the LWVIL Climate Google group. Now, please stick around to complete a brief evaluation poll. And then I understand that Rosemary is planning on opening up the, well, unmuting everybody, are you? And we'll put ourselves on gallery view and we can.
I think I'll just open the chat because it'll be
Open the
too many
chat,
people
okay.
Yeah, too many people talking at once. But we'll
Okay,
open the chat.
so we'll open the chat for everyone to talk with each other for a few minutes after we're done. Tomorrow at noon, please join us for our next session titled Ranked Choice Voting: Prospects and Barriers for Implementation in Illinois. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to stop
Thank
the
you.
recording and then I'm going to start the poll.